When was the last time you heard someone rave about a mock apple pie or a fresh peach cobbler? They might not be trending now, but once you get a bite of their past, you'll wonder why these desserts ever disappeared. By the end of this video, you'll have a dessert list that's too sweet to keep in the past. The list kicks off with Bananas Foster's, the dessert that used the cheapest and most common fruit of all time. Bananas were served on top of ice cream, but wait, this was not just your typical ice cream sundae recipe. The real taste lay in the rum, butter, and cinnamon sauce that would be covering the scoop of vanilla ice cream with bananas. In terms of flavor, Banana Fosters were popular amongst young adults and parents who wanted a treat for themselves after serving ice cream on the dinner table. Yet the flavor was not its only attraction. People particularly noted how some chefs would add and ignite the alcohol during the sauce making. So, not only was this dish a joy to eat on every level imaginable, it was something you could really flex about if you made it well. Bananas Foster's had a really rich and vibrant flavor that just screamed feel-good comfort food. Truly, in that regard, even now that it is mostly a treat of the past, there are few desserts that compare. Despite being called Boston cream pie, it found its fame in Massachusetts in the 70s particularly. It was a simple custard-filled cake with chocolate glaze and was a dessert fit for royalty. It was served at the Parker House's grand opening, and even today it continues to be recreated, both faithfully to the original and innovatively by talented bakers wanting to add their mark to the historic dish. Fondue, a beacon of the 70s dining scene, created memorable moments around pots of melted cheese and chocolate, fostering a unique communal eating experience. Its decline in popularity can be traced back to the end of the fondue party trend, as people sought quicker, less interactive dining experiences due to changing lifestyles. The rise of fast food and ready-to-eat meals emphasized convenience over the communal, leisurely dining experiences fondue provided. Additionally, the health concerns associated with the high-calorie content of cheese and chocolate fondues contributed to its waning popularity, as dietary trends shifted towards lower fat and lower sugar options. Despite this, fondue retains a nostalgic charm and has potential for resurgence with healthier ingredients and innovative dining concepts. Back to the dawn of the 2000s, which brought a lot of new stuff with it using unfamiliar and familiar concepts. One of those was profiterole, whiskey, and maple trifles. Profiteroles themselves were just these cream-filled pastry puffs, which caught on within America when the country started to deeply explore French cuisine. They were one of the first kinds of choux pastries that you could find, which is the same kind of pastry they used to make eclairs and cream puffs. It was really common to see profiteroles in New Orleans, where the first French immigrants and settlers had made communities and waved their recipes into the culture of American eating. Those recipes never called for using trifles, though, which to some was sort of seen as an affront to tradition, but to most it was seen as a very fun way to get a trifle-based dish as a reliable option for a Saturday night dinner. This dessert had a lot of elegance to it, which made it perfect for outings with meaning or any kind of celebration. This maple version used whiskey and maple syrup, which gave it a very nostalgic flavor you definitely associate with American eating. It got really popular in Midwestern and Southern restaurants in the 2000s, and the dessert was amazing at working both whiskey and maple syrup into one neatly blended flavor. Californian raisin cookies, soft cookies filled with sweet raisins. They got pretty popular due to an ad agency called Foot, Cone, and Belding, which ran a commercial at the time which helped these cookies gain a lot of momentum. Since then, they've become a part of California culture, and any local will delightfully tell you childhood memories of them. Rocky Mountain chocolate fudge is one of the sweetest scoops of ice cream you might try. This delectable, rich, and creamy chocolate fudge owes its success to Rocky Mountain Chocolate, which is an international brand that makes some of Colorado's finest Rocky Mountain tubs. You'll find outlets everywhere, but the best ice cream has to be where the company's based in Durango. This has been a favorite of children across every state, and if you're visiting as a tourist, you need to grab yourself some. Less of a full meal and more of a dessert snack, a cherry wink, not to be confused with a cherry wine or Hosier's song, were a dish that redefined what a cookie could be. Maraschino cherries that would grace perfectly crumbly cookies topped with crunchy cornflakes meant every box was ticked. Sensation and taste-wise, it was something America just had not experienced before, nor did people's imagination ever swing that way. Famous recipes for cherry winks can be found in the 1950s, so we are glad they swung eventually. Happiness is short-lived, and so were cherry winks, because by the 70s and 80s, America either went to healthier cookies or fatter and bigger ones. There was a swelling trend of cookie sizes becoming twice or thrice as big that did not fit the idea of a cherry wink. Ambrosia salad, once a staple of festive gatherings, has seen its popularity wane due to its heavy reliance on canned fruits and marshmallows, clashing with modern dietary preferences that favor fresh, unprocessed ingredients. The advent of more sophisticated desserts and salads, which offer complex flavors and textures without excessive sweetness, also contributed to its decline. Additionally, the visual appeal of ambrosia salad, with its mix of colorful fruits and marshmallows, no longer captivates in an era where aesthetics in food are increasingly valued but demand a more refined presentation. Despite this, ambrosia salad's nostalgic value keeps it in the memories of those who grew up with it, suggesting a possible pathway for reinvention that aligns with contemporary tastes and health considerations. Huckleberry pie from Idaho made with locally sourced wild huckleberries. A match made not in heaven, but an excellent kitchen. This is an incredible mix of sugar, lemon zest and juice, grounded cinnamon, filled in a pie crust and dotted with butter and huckleberries. Brownies aren't just popular in Illinois. Fudgy, chocolatey squares that were popularized in Chicago. Do they need any introduction? Kids, adults, elders, anyone with a heartbeat the world over loves brownies, but Illinois is particularly famous for them because of their rich, dark chocolate fudge. Whether it gets its name from a boxing mule or a popular Civil War country tune, shoe-fly pies started out as one of Pennsylvania's earliest proper fusion food loves. Half pie, half cake, all parts delicious, this pie was made with molasses and usually known for its vivid sweetness. Often described as intense and sometimes too overbearing for the casual crowd, shoe-fly pies were a classic of the last century for sweet tooths around the country, especially in states like Wisconsin, Texas, and Georgia. Eventually, it started to spread to every end of America and became a name people would remember even recently. Not as many would remember still making it or eating a slice of a pie, though. Molasses, dark corn syrup, and brown sugar were a few ingredients that went out of style. Key lime pie is a creamy pie made in Florida from readily available key lime juice. Having a historical connection with Florida, the pie is usually made with egg yolks, condensed sweetened milk, or an optional meringue topping made from egg whites. If you feel real fancy, you can add some whipped cream too. The limes used tend to grow in Key West, Florida, hence the association. Pineapple. Upside-down cake was another affront to America's long-standing belief that pineapples are best enjoyed as they are. Remember the casseroles with the pineapples? Properly rejected from early on, they just made most 20 to 30-year-olds feel justified in their pineapple discrimination. Each time pineapples made a feature on any food's discography, sales went down. However, what they did not realize was that God made everything in pairs. This fruit would find its partner in a vanilla sponge cake with caramelized rings that even used the juice from the fruit. Infusing it into the sponge cake, it was a guilty pleasure for some and a certified delicacy for others. For us, it is definitely in our top 3 for what we would like to try from this list. The colorful and jiggly Jell-O salad once stood as a centerpiece of festivity, celebrated for its versatility and the playful splash it brought to gatherings. This dessert, or side dish, was celebrated for its versatility and festive appearance, making it a staple at gatherings. Its decline can be attributed to changing dietary preferences and an increased awareness of artificial ingredients found in many Jell-O products. The rise of whole food and natural eating trends made the gelatin-based salad
often loaded with canned fruits or vegetables and sometimes even mayonnaise or cheese, seem outdated and unappetizing. Furthermore, as culinary tastes evolved, the texture and concept of Jell-O salad became less appealing, replaced by fresher, more natural dessert options that reflected contemporary health and wellness trends.
At this point, we have had all kinds of pudding, so let's go full circle with plum pudding. Steamed instead of boiled this time around, the pudding was the base for a plum filling that just hit a very specific spot for folks. You know when something is sweet but kind of in a sour and bitter way, but it is still oddly refreshing and addictive to eat? Plum pudding is that to a T, and it was one very solidly cemented Thanksgiving treat. Just about a regular at any household table that time of the year. Now, you would not find it in places any time of the year, at least not easily. Dutch letters became an Iowa staple quickly. Pastry filled with almond paste, shaped into letters. Dutch refugees took to baking and created this in Pella, Iowa. Fun regional fact: these Dutch letters are actually a pretty common and beloved treat at the Tulip Festival in Pella. They were even sold at markets, gas stations, and more.
The pineapple upside-down cake, a marvel of sweetness and texture, charmed its way into hearts with its caramelized pineapple topping and moist cake base. However, as dessert trends moved towards more sophisticated and less sugary options, this cake's presence dwindled. The move away from canned fruit and processed ingredients, which are central to the classic version of this cake, in favor of fresh, less processed alternatives, also contributed to its decline. Moreover, the advent of foodie culture, which prioritizes novel and Instagram-worthy desserts, left the more traditional and less visually dynamic pineapple upside-down cake behind. Despite this, it remains a cherished reminder of past baking traditions, holding potential for revival with updated, healthier ingredients.
Like no-bake eggnog icebox cakes were a lot more popular. So, in case you don't know, they used to have ice boxes to keep things cold before refrigeration. As we know, it became a thing. In the post-war era, there were still a lot of people who lived by rationing and making the best use of everything. You know, habits in wartime are hard to get rid of, right? These cakes became really popular because they used eggnog and were a convenience dessert. Plus, the tradition of icebox cakes was something that had been made really accessible to maintain. Thanks to companies like Nabisco, which continued to make their chocolate wafer cookies and popularized icebox cake recipes with those at the core, it just meant that everything you needed for it, you could buy. It was also a sign of how Americans would go towards food that was ready-made more than food that needed to be cooked from scratch. While it may not have the same attention to detail, it gets the job done pretty well, since sometimes you just need good food that hits the spot. It doesn't have to be perfectly presented or made. These recipes came pretty close, though. Marionberry pie with the berries picked straight out of Oregon will give your average pie a run for their money. This was the perfect blend of tangy and sweet that berry lovers were craving for in the 70s. Marionberries were not the common berries used in pies, but these newer rendition was an instant success at bakeries. Shoofly pies have a history way outside Pennsylvania. They're also known as molasses pie due to the inner molasses filling and are popular in several regions in the USA. You can expect a pretty jam-like flavor when you bite into this, with a sweet but tame crust that adds a great crunch to ease you into it. Of course, no Christmas dessert that you would associate with home cooking, whether it's your grandma's or your mom's, would be complete without a cranberry-based banger. Hot cranberry bakes were just that, and they were this really sweet, tangy baked cranberry masterpiece that would get mixed with dried nuts or sometimes even oats. Most home chefs at the time would top it off with breadcrumbs that would give an awesome crunch when baked, and the cranberry filling was just to die for. The entire cranberry craze would start every year around the fall, when harvests really peak and suppliers are loaded with fresh stock. This dish had its heyday in the falls after the 1960s, when it caught on as the perfect holiday dessert to make for the family, especially in places like New England. It was different from other food at the time in that it was probably one of the last examples of purely seasonal cooking. You couldn't make this at the wrong times of the year. Molasses? Where would America be without them? Probably in the farms trying to get one more potato than last year. Molasses have been the savior to hunger aches and pains ever since the 17th century, and that definitely continued with the introduction of dishes like molasses. Tiramisu is a bit of a weird thing. There's never been an overwhelming love for it in the 20th century, but there's been a swarm of tiramisu lovers in the late 2000s, especially thanks to the internet, because it's a dish that really shows off your cooking skills. It's an Italian dish that came in the 1980s and 1990s, and one version of it, tiramisu Yule log cake, got really popular as a part of holiday baking. By now, America was moving pretty far away from dishes like this, though. The emphasis in the post-World War II era was on things like convenience food, thanks to a rise in TV culture. People were also really focusing on experimental dishes that combined foreign influences with American classics. That can kind of explain the birth of the tiramisu Yule log cake, since the Yule log cake itself is a European classic. Cookbooks that really focused on holiday cooking, like Martha Stewart's Christmas or Test Kitchen's Holiday Baking, featured this version of the dish, which made a lot of use of creamy mascarpone and coffee. Another contender for the oldest cake on this list is probably the Charlotte Russe cake. This was created by Marie-Antoine Carême, and in the 18th century, it was the equivalent of Five Guys. Basically, everyone and their grandmother would be having it. The whipped mousse, the Bavarian cream, screamed rich people's food while being somewhat accessible to the general public. Also, gelatin was not exactly as popular as it is today. Back then, including it in a cake was a stroke of genius and a bit of a rarity. It was too much of a chore to prepare in households on a whim, though. Did not help that the times that followed were some of the most economically challenging times. This made the public lean towards low-cost food a lot more than fancy cakes. You would traditionally prepare this by letting it rest for the entire night, and that definitely contributed to the difficulty of making it. It was not the most complicated cake, but it was also a little draining to make. And in hard times, you just want easy comfort food, so it faded away. It sounds like meat pie, but meat is not the star ingredient. Rather, it's made from spiced fruits and sweet, sometimes with a hint of meat. Historically, mincemeat pies trace their origins to medieval England and originally contained real meat. The preparation back then involved finely chopping beef or mutton and mixing it with a variety of dried fruits like raisins, currants, and apples, along with spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. Sweat, beef or mutton fat, was added for richness, and the mixture was soaked in brandy or another liquor to enhance the flavor. This blend was then left to mature, allowing the flavors to meld together before being encased in a pastry crust and baked. But by the 70s, the meat was mostly gone, but the name stuck. Who remembers those ads claiming these pies were just like grandma's? Some people may miss it, but we can all agree that the mixture was overly rich and oddly textured. Did anyone else ever wonder why this pie still lingers on holiday tables? Maybe it's time to leave this peculiar dessert in the past where it belongs. Southern buttermilk pie is no real exception. It was a family classic that many home chefs perfected over the span of their time as a chef. It was typically kept only for holidays, gatherings, and celebrations, but over time it even became popular as a casual dish that families would prepare when it had been a while since they last saw each other. Did you ever know how buttermilk got so popular as a pie ingredient, though? It's actually because of butter making in general. The milk was literally just a side effect of the process, but farmers thought it could turn a neat little profit if they started selling that too. They didn't know they'd be handing the keys to an entirely new kingdom of culinary mysteries to people when they first did it. Since then, people have added all kinds of things to buttermilk pies to get newer flavors out of it. Vanilla extracts, lemon zest, berries, maple syrup, you name it. A buttermilk pie out there is probably based around it. Is a cranberry fluff salad. Cranberries are already something you must be pretty used to living in this country, since every Christmas boomer can never seem to let go of their classic cranberry dishes that they swear have been passed down since forever in their family. They're actually not wrong. Cranberries are one of the few things that grow natively in America after all the way from the East Coast to the central United States, which is why it's so popular. These salads were a side dish, but also a dessert, and it was getting harder to tell which was which since both genres of food started taking elements from each other thanks to dishes like this. It was at its highest popularity during the 1970s after the war period, when people had settled back into eating for fun and not for fuel. Despite how it's such a nice dish to look at and eat, it was also forgotten relatively quickly into the 2010s. Thankfully, the recent interest in reinterpreting old American dishes from the 20th century has helped it have a little bit of a revival, so who knows? Maybe we can see a full comeback. Sticking to the cranberry theme, we have something that'll really take your imagination for a run this time. Look,
Charlotte Russe, with its rich cream and ladyfingers, brings back the luxury of old-time parties, showing off classic American elegance. It has waned in popularity due to evolving dessert trends favoring more straightforward, less time-consuming recipes. The assembly of Charlotte Russe, requiring meticulous layering and stabilization of the cream, can seem daunting compared to the ease of preparing more contemporary desserts. Additionally, the shift towards lighter, fruit-forward, and less processed desserts has made the traditionally rich Charlotte Russe less appealing. However, its historical significance and potential for modern adaptation, using fresher ingredients or simplified techniques, offer avenues for reintroducing Charlotte Russe to those seeking a blend of culinary tradition and contemporary taste.
apple pies made with Washington apples are known for being particularly sweet, especially if you catch them during the right time in harvest. Make sure to give it a shot at least once, and to get a double crust when you do. If their apple pies weren't already it, that crust would definitely be the state's specialty. The stack cake is a bit on the nose naming-wise. It is what it sounds like. West Virginia's specialty is a multi-layered tower of a cake with a dried filling inside, which can easily serve you and yours and also makes for the perfect dish to bring to any party. Kringles used to be the Nordlings' idea of a pretzel, but it is now Wisconsin's idea of an afternoon snack, a sweet pastry with flaky layers of sweet butter-filled dough. Wisconsin actually has a lot of Danish heritage, so it makes sense why this dish became popular there. Prune whip is something that was also common with housewives of the 70s who would be your grandparents today. 1. It was really quick and required nothing more than prunes and sugar. 2. It was delicious enough to get the whole family or neighborhood talking. Prune whips were literally just prunes and sugar in double boilers blended together, then put on ice. What you had then was either a pudding-like dish you could eat on its own, or one absolutely incredible and out-of-the-box pie filling. You see why it got popular at family tables now, don't you? This dish's downfall, sadly, was just the growing irrelevance of things as time presses on. People moved on to other whips and mixes, even if the prune whip was great. Lefse and North Dakota actually go all the way back to the 18th century. Scandinavians brought lefse over to the States, and it became a prime-time holiday treat that everyone loved to bake. Lefse really became popular in the 70s, when many households would serve this as a main dish during Thanksgiving dinners. Some of you might think of wild bucks, some of you might think of the winter soldier. But Ohio is actually called the Buckeye State not for its delicious peanut butter fudge candies, which are traditionally dipped in chocolate, but the Buckeye State because of the trees that dominate the region. The dish, on the other hand, is called a buckeye because it resembles the nuts that grow on those trees. Things have a funny way of coming full circle.
German chocolate cake, despite its rich flavor and beloved status, has faced competition from newer, more fashionable desserts that cater to evolving tastes and dietary restrictions. The cake's traditional recipe, which includes a dense, sweet coconut pecan frosting, may not align with current trends toward lighter, less sugary desserts. Additionally, the misconception about its origin, it's American, not German, and the increasing preference for global flavors have also contributed to its reduced prominence in the dessert landscape. Nonetheless, German chocolate cake's decline has not erased its legacy. It remains a nostalgic favorite for many, underscoring the potential for adaptation to today's more health-conscious and flavor-diverse dessert market.
When you think of New York, Maybe you picture Alicia Keys' Empire State of Mind. Maybe your head goes to the Step Up movies. But your taste buds should definitely go to a classic New York cheesecake, a dense yet fluffy custard dessert that actually needs to be prepared in a water bath for it to get the right consistency. The sweet potato pie is a North Carolina classic and a year-round presence in kitchens everywhere. Why? Because it works both ways. Is it time for Thanksgiving? Do you not have a stellar pumpkin pie ready to awe the guests with? The sweet potato pie is calling your name as your ever-scrumptious savior. Maybe it's Christmas, and the eggnog this year just isn't hitting the spot. Whip this out and everybody will be leaving satisfied. Can't go wrong with a spiced-up pie with sweet potatoes. Lemon bars are just like prune whips in the sense that the concept is an incredibly basic mix of two ideas we know make a great couple. In this case, it was the idea of a candy bar with a filling. You have your Snickers and your Mars to argue about why this is the only valid filled candy bar. Lemon bars were not something so hotly debated because people just kind of said, yeah, I need that. To them from the start. Lemon curd fillings in dessert bars, actually. Think of it like a lemon-flavored Mars. While they were an idea that clicked with the crowd from the get-go, they went out of fashion just as soon as they came onto the scene. Viennetta, with its elegant layers, once defined the pinnacle of frozen desserts, offering a sophisticated alternative to the everyday ice cream treat. The introduction of an array of gourmet frozen desserts and artisanal ice cream options overshadowed Viennetta's once unique appeal. Additionally, changes in consumer preferences towards customizable and varied dessert options made Viennetta, which offers limited flavors and variations, less attractive. Its decline also reflects broader shifts in the dessert market, where consumers increasingly seek out desserts that offer both visual appeal and a complex array of flavors, something Viennetta's simple elegance no longer fulfilled for many. Grandmas would definitely like the next one we have up, the appropriately named Figgy Duffs. Really, this was just a boiled pudding that your nan would probably cook up every other weekend. Except one tiny fact which has to do with where it originated from explains how this simple recipe got to be known as Figgy Duffs. People would usually call raisins figs in Labrador, its birthplace, but in America people took that literally. A lot of people would actually use figs in the dish along with raisins in what was one savory but sweet dry fruit bag pudding. Caramel was also a really frequent complimentary choice that was either in the pudding or worked in using caramel crumbs. In theory, it sounds pretty fun, and we would definitely try it today if it was available. Next is the chocolate mayo cake. This sounds more experimental than it is. It still uses the staple ingredients you've come to know and love. It just replaces the eggs and butter part with mayo. Now, an older version of this recipe messes around with dry fruits like dates. Nutty flavors were just as popular in the 1940s as they are now. This cake also used to be called the $100 cake because of an old legend. The story goes that a woman went to a bakery in New York City, having tried a chocolate cake so divine she just had to have the recipe. So she struck a bargain with the chef that for $100 he would give her the recipe. The rest is history. Chocolate mayo cake. And this story was so big back in the day that it even caught the National Food Editor's attention. Mayo tends to be a condiment reserved for burgers and sandwiches or salad dressings these days, so you can definitely see why the cake went out of style. Dacquoise, distinguished by its layers of nut meringue and buttercream, has become a lesser-known dessert amid the rise of simpler, more casual sweets. The meticulous preparation required to achieve its delicate texture and the perceived richness of its fillings may deter those seeking quicker, lighter dessert options. Furthermore, the increased interest in gluten-free and health-conscious eating challenges the traditional dacquoise, which is rich in sugars and fats. Yet its inherent elegance and the possibility of incorporating alternative, healthier ingredients suggests that dacquoise could be rediscovered and appreciated by a new generation interested in sophisticated yet accessible baking projects. Christmas salads really set the mood for the whole holiday. Few things are as good at establishing that a holiday feels like a good gelatin salad that everyone can pass around, regardless of age or tastes. The salad haters get to enjoy a bowl, The salad lovers are at the edge of their seats, usually asking for seconds, and the home chefs love making a new dish that actually expands their imagination a bit. Snow salads were kind of a sweet spot for everyone because they also had whipped cream and marshmallows involved. There was fruit too, but the emphasis was on the whipped cream. These were also really pretty-looking salads. They had a pastel color that made them really attractive for anybody to have at the table. American holidays wouldn't be complete without these back in the 60s, and potlucks wouldn't be either. Most cookbooks, like the Joys of Jell-O or Junior League collections, also included recipes that involved several different variations of snow salads, which were not only very in theme with the season, but also something that just became so ingrained into Christmas tradition that people couldn't imagine a holiday without them. Christmas morning coffee cake was another way to really break in the festive spirit. You would wake up, shovel snow, come back in, and enjoy your morning with some coffee cake. America's probably one of the few countries on the planet with a die-hard fan base for coffee-flavored desserts, as the rest of the world chooses to sleep on this phenomenal combination of coffee notes with famous desserts. Not our cookbooks, though. From Betty Crocker cookbooks to the ones targeted right at your grandparents like the Taste of Home ones, everyone would recommend you start that Christmas right with a morning coffee cake. You could say it really picked up after the 50s, but I would say it peaked around the 2000s. Coffee cakes are already a staple for breakfast or brunch, so when they became a staple for holidays too, it kind of cemented them as one of the most American things you could experience. Really a part of the culture. And I would rather not imagine a country where bakeries don't serve you coffee cake when the temperature drops.
Lady Baltimore cake, with its origins in Southern baking traditions, faces obscurity as modern tastes lean towards less sugary, more globally influenced desserts. The cake's distinctive fruit and nut filling, once a mark of indulgence, contrasts with current trends favoring minimalism and natural ingredients. The labor-intensive preparation and perceived heaviness of traditional cakes like Lady Baltimore have contributed to their decline in favor of lighter, simpler desserts. However, the cultural heritage and the potential for ingredient innovation in Lady Baltimore cake present an opportunity for revival among enthusiasts of American baking history and those seeking a connection to culinary heritage through updated, healthier versions.
You're in luck if cookies are your thing. I got another solid one for you right out of the hearts of 1950 cookbooks. Cherry Winks, as you can guess, were this cookie that really highlighted how good a maraschino cherry can get. That wasn't all, though. It was one of the first cookies that used the stuff it did. The foundation for the cookies is an oatmeal cookie base after all, and that's been around way longer than either you or me. It was in the post-war period that most of the other ingredients involved with Cherry Winks started becoming something everyone everywhere in the States could afford and get. Still, this was a unique recipe, all things considered. I mean, where else will you hear about dates, cherries, and crushed cornflakes in a cookie winning a Pillsbury Bake-Off contest? Yeah, I thought so. The baking trends in the 1950s were pretty experimental, and here it shows. Plus, no one could say no to maraschino cherries anyway. Mix all that with rolled oats, brown sugar, and vanilla, plus some sweetened shredded coconut, all widely available commercial products now, and you can understand how this dish took off the way it did in a time where home baking was trending like never before. If you ever ask your grandma about this, I'm sure she can recall a Christmas or two where there were ample cherry winks to go around. I guess wafers are close enough to a cookie that this could count, but I'll leave that for you to decide.
Crepe Suzette, featuring thin pancakes and a showy orange sauce, added a touch of French elegance to the table, impressing with its dramatic flambé performance. However, its decline in popularity can be attributed to the modern diner's preference for quicker, less intricate desserts. The preparation of crepe Suzette, particularly the flambé technique, while theatrical, may seem intimidating to the home cook and overly elaborate for casual dining. Additionally, the shift towards lighter, health-conscious dessert options has overshadowed richer, buttery desserts. Despite this, crepe Suzette holds potential for resurgence with adaptations that simplify the recipe without compromising its essence, catering to the contemporary interest in both gourmet home cooking and healthier, refined sweets.
Another much more recent Christmas tradition was chocolate mint slice Christmas balls. These actually came over from Australia, and that's a bit of a surprise since we don't have a big focus on Australian food here. Even when we were importing culture and food from other countries, nobody really looked at Australia and thought, yeah, I need whatever they're on. Anyway, that was different for these Christmas balls because they were some of the first instances of chocolate mint actually gaining a fan base in the States. Mint was something we only really associated with Christmas back then, so it made sense that this dish found a foothold in holiday season cooking. Plus, it also fit the culture of no-fuss recipes that was going on throughout the 20th century. I think after all that rationing and budgeting, people just got used to simple dishes that did one thing pretty well instead of flashy ones with 4 different flavors and themes going on. Something you can rely on is always best, you know? Plus, for most people, it was really easy to make, and it made for one hell of a gift basket, so people adopted this dainty dish into their regular holiday repertoire. Getting a basket full of these mint-flavored balls covered in this dark, melted chocolate was amazing. Americans took it a step further and crushed cookies to make a base for the dough of the balls. It usually contained cookies like Oreos, too. All in all, this was definitely one for people with a massive sweet tooth and for people who don't give in at the tiniest sugar rush. Who could forget the polarizing taste of anise cookies? They were made from simple ingredients like flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and a generous amount of anise extract or seeds. Traditionally, they were mixed, rolled out, cut into festive shapes, and baked to a light, crispy perfection. While they became a holiday staple among European immigrant families in the US, many kids found these cookies the least appealing on the plate. Did your family have an anise cookie recipe passed down from great-grandma? But their strong licorice taste isn't for everyone. It's no wonder these cookies are more of a memory than a modern-day favorite. We left the old and fell in love with new stuff, and there's no going back. Now, we've discussed lots of bakery favorites, but what about a cake you'd eat at a wedding? Apple stacks were just that and more. It would have an extremely rich flavor that was possible because it would need to be rested for an entire night before serving, but that's sealed in the essence of every ingredient in each bite. It is no surprise that such a rich cake was a popular choice for weddings. However, it probably went out of style because it didn't match the part in looks. On the outside, it looks like a simple enough cake, but on the inside, it's a cake fit for any celebration. Still, it must have been divine to get married while this was being served, right? Speaking of divinity, scripture cake, aka Bible cake, was another extremely popular one amongst academic institutions, Christian households, big shocker, and Sunday school kids. If you came from a religious family basically, you probably had this back then. It was not so different from any other kind of cake. It had sugar, almonds, honey, some mixed spices, and your other typical ingredients. However, it got its name because of its incredibly light, almost beige, off-whitish color and surreally sweet flavor. It was a reward for devout children, particularly religious ones, or ones who were just doing great at Sunday school. Hopefully everyone got equal servings, since you'd be hard-pressed to find this cake anymore. Pavlova rolls are also something you could consider a pretty new concept in retrospect. There wasn't really much of a demand for them until the 60s after the war, when America first started to explore foreign cuisines and experiment with desserts from different parts of the world. Pavlovas are a delicate meringue-based dessert, typically topped with fruits and whipped cream, but the roll version makes use of a jelly-style roll. This variation not only retains the lightness and sweetness of the original, but also offers more portability, making it easier to eat on the go. You know, we probably don't think about this stuff often, but those little details like whether you can walk around while eating play a huge role in shaping the popularity and practicality of a dish. Accessibility is key in the food world, and pavlova rolls exemplify that principle quite well. The combination of sweet meringue and fruity jelly layers offers a delightful contrast, which may have contributed to their brief moment of fame. However, they didn't seem to do well past the late 90s, possibly because the popularity of jelly-style rolls declined and consumer preferences shifted towards more modern or health-conscious desserts. Trends in the food industry are unpredictable, and even the most well-loved treats can fade out when new ideas or health trends emerge.
Rum baba, soaked in rum and often garnished with whipped cream or fruit, has seen a decline as dessert preferences have evolved towards more subtle, less alcohol-heavy options. The saturated boozy dessert's richness and the complexity of its preparation, requiring yeast-leavened cake and precise soaking, pose challenges for the modern baker looking for quick and straightforward recipes. Additionally, the growing trend towards health-conscious eating has made the calorie-dense rum baba less appealing. However, this dessert's rich history and the opportunity for modern reinterpretation with a variety of liquors or non-alcoholic versions could spark renewed interest, particularly among those exploring traditional desserts with a contemporary twist.
Maple cream pie is usually done with the maple syrup filled inside a single-layer pastry, but in Vermont it's a bit more typical to see double or even triple layers. Of course, they compensate with a more concentrated syrup. This one really packs a punch. This chess pie plays no games with you. No special tricks, no unique historical quirks, just a simple sweet chess pie what you'd expect, executed and done to perfection. Something you'd only find in Virginia during the 70s.
Tunnel of fudge cake stood out for its innovative use of a fudgy filling within a cake, capturing the hearts of many during the Pillsbury Bake-Off in 1966. Its decline in popularity can be traced to the evolution of dessert preferences towards lighter, less rich options. Additionally, the complexity of achieving the perfect gooey center without undercooking the rest of the cake presents a challenge for the average home baker, contributing to its waning presence in modern kitchens. As consumers have grown more health-conscious, the dense, calorie-laden nature of the cake further diminishes its appeal. However, the enduring love for chocolate and nostalgia for classic desserts offers an opportunity for Tunnel of Fudge Cake to be reinvented with healthier ingredients and simplified preparation techniques.
Luckily, the masses' cries would be heard when a resurgence of banana pudding rocked America to its last cent. Bakeries were sold out left and right, people were making it every weekend, especially for the Super Bowl, and it was suddenly really popular with the Jewish. Banana puddings were something America forgot once before too, but it would always seem to keep coming back to it eventually. Sure as the sun would rise the next day, the next decade at least 1 year would be banana puddings. Who could object to the perfect mix of creamy banana-flavored pudding with slices of the fruit or whipped cream or both? Calorie-friendly is not on this one's resume, and honestly, when it tastes like that, fair enough. America seems to have moved towards one of its phases where it has forgotten again. Banana pudding does not enjoy nearly a quarter of that same love today.
Originally created for Queen Victoria's Jubilee, Cherry's Jubilee brings a royal touch to the table, making its historical significance part of its charm. It can easily be adapted into a non-alcoholic version for family-friendly events, ensuring its universal appeal. Serving it over ice cream is classic, but layering it in parfaits or as a crepe filling adds a creative twist. The flambe technique not only captivates diners with its dramatic presentation, but also enhances the dessert's rich flavors. While traditional recipes feature cherries, variations using different fruits or liquors invite customization. Cherries, Jubilee's blend of history, versatility, and theatrical presentation keeps it a beloved classic, offering a special experience for today's diners seeking both tradition and innovation.
Texas sheet cake was a complete legend in the southern state. Some accounts say that it was a 1930s hit, but there are cookbook recipes that date back from the 60s as well. Needless to say, it spent its time in the Texan spotlight. It had strong tastes of cocoa and vanilla, and the thickness of the filling and topping was to die for. However, its taste was not what made this cake so popular. It was its variety. People would recreate this in many different ways, with their own takes on the frosting, toppings, and layers. It's largely a forgotten staple, but if you are from the state, your grandparents probably have fond memories if you ask them. The Italian cream cake traveled the world before landing in America during the late 1950s. Having found its roots in Renaissance Italy, the Italian cream cake was introduced in Texas by an Italian baker who settled in America. You may rarely see this cake in bakeries today, but when it was first introduced, the cream cake was a hit. Many people would agree that the secret addition of 3 ounces of shredded coconut in a vanilla cream cake was what made it taste great. The cake got sidelined, however, as cheesecakes started gaining popularity in the United States. This next dessert is the notorious liver ice cream. Yes, you heard that right. This bizarre 70s creation combined liver with the creamy delight of ice cream. Made from liver puree, sugar, cream, and sometimes a dash of brandy or vanilla, this dessert was an acquired taste, to say the least. The preparation involved blending the liver into a smooth paste, mixing it with the other ingredients and churning it like regular ice cream. It started as a trend in the 70s that embraced experimental and questionable flavors. Unfortunately, liver ice cream quickly fell out of favor. It was a disastrous attempt to combine savory and sweet. But in the end, the unsettling flavor mix of liver and ice cream left most people cringing and questioning the culinary experiment. Can you imagine the shock of finding liver in your dessert? Although they claimed it was healthy, even the most daring eaters found this oddity hard to swallow. It's safe to say this is one 70s dessert we're happy to leave behind. Iconic chocolate chip pie is no exception. She's the reason this dish has its style and substance, which separates it from just any other old chocolate chip dish. It was really popular at all kinds of potlucks. People who would organize big family events and wanted to save costs by catering themselves would make a lot of use of Wilma Tidwell's legendary recipes. Have you ever heard of word-of-mouth promotion? The next time someone at your workplace or during a heated online argument brings up whether or not it works, you can give this pie as an example. Its popularity was entirely, and I mean completely, sustained by word of mouth. People wouldn't ever stop talking about it, and I mean sure, the initial news of the pie may have gotten around better thanks to community cookbooks, but it took one person to read about it, and by the next day, 10 others in the neighborhood knew about it, and 5 were trying to get the recipe down. This pie was really special to Americans because chocolate chip cookies were already a massive thing in every corner of American life. Stopping for a quick sandwich at Subway? Why not grab a chocolate chip cookie on your way out? Got a date? Nothing better than some chocolate chip goodness. Need to feel better with some sugar binging? You know what to do. So it wasn't really just the South that loved this pie. It was everywhere. If you look at a lot of the food in the South, you'll find the impact of buttermilk everywhere. I don't know who thought this was a great idea, but mayonnaise cake combines creamy mayo with cake batter, promising a tender crumb and rich flavor. The cake is made by combining typical cake ingredients like flour, sugar, eggs, and cocoa powder. The twist comes with the addition of mayonnaise, which replaces the need for butter or oil, providing the necessary fats and moisture. The mayo is mixed with water and vanilla extract before being added to the dry ingredients. Homemakers loved it for its convenience and clever kitchen shortcut. Despite its moist texture, the idea of mayo in a cake was off-putting to many. Manufacturers marketed mayo as the secret to baking perfection, but let's be honest, the concept left a lot to be desired. While it's a nostalgic nod to culinary creativity, mayonnaise cake is one 70s dessert that most are happy to leave behind. Did anyone else's family try this unusual treat? No shades to the inventor, but I have the same feeling about mincemeat pie. Nectarine pie is probably something you aren't used to hearing either. Nectarines themselves are believed to be nature's offshoot of peaches, and the pie also evolved alongside peach pie, which is kind of poetic, I'm not gonna lie. In terms of flavor, you can kind of expect it to taste like peach pie, but not fully. This one's more acidic, and it has a way heavier taste. It's also made with a thickener in a flaky, heavy crust, so it's not exactly a light or airy dessert. The filling is made out of maple syrup and nothing else, and in places like New Hampshire, it's even a festival dish that people make to celebrate the maple harvest. Honestly, no one knows where nectarine pie really came from, but I can tell you that agricultural-based cooking, which made use of natural harvests and fruits that were native to the land, was something extremely common in the South. A lot of these dishes have deep ties to the South because there was a still strong tradition of farming and harvesting in the area, unlike the major metropolitan ones like New York and Washington, where street food and deli culture was more popular. Anyway, fresh nectarines were one hell of a natural thickener, but people would still add cornstarch on top for an even firmer pie. It's said that this dish is the pride of the South, and a lot of people actually preferred it to a typical peach pie since it was a fresh taste but also familiar. Christmas truffles, which used white chocolate and mixed it with dried fruit to give a new twist on the dish. It was even popular for the grandmas of today, since the Sweet Book of Candy Making, a do-it-yourself gift-giving book, featured the dish. All kinds of gourmet candy cookbooks would give it love, too, since this was a really warm, fuzzy dish that made great use of white chocolate and fruit. Everyone loves a bit of Mars, right? It's one of the best chocolate bars we've ever had. I mean, it definitely beats Toblerone for me, but that's a video for another day. Another reason people really love the bar, besides its obvious elite taste, is that it could be worked into dishes like Mars Bar Christmas crackles pretty easily. You could do a lot of DIY stuff with a few bars of Mars and end up with a pretty solid dessert to show off your ingenuity with. Mars bars were already a favorite in America, so when people took Rice Krispies and melted Mars to make a no-bake Christmas dessert in 1990, it really took off. It was a big part of holiday party menus, and none of them felt complete without it in that time period. It was also found in no-bake sections of cookbooks, and the ones that focused a lot on party food always made a mention of it for Christmas-themed events. Breaking away from religious dishes, the jam bundt cake was a crowd pleaser in Tennessee in the 50s. Why? It was delicious and it was easy. Few bakers, no people, need more reason than that to spend money or time on a dish. It was a sight to look at too, with a hole in the middle that allowed a lot of customizing. That's probably why it got so popular with the baking community, a cake that everyone you know loves that you can experiment with to test your baking chops on. People would try out different variations of it, and so ingredients for the cake were constantly bought and sold. Bundt cake's fame got to the point where Pillsbury made a whole catalog of cake mixes for bundt cakes, but they shut it down eventually around the 1990s due to a constant decline in sales. Christmas jelly slices were something that were short-lived but thoroughly enjoyed. They started off in the 50s as a part of all the Jell-O promotional cookbooks you'd see at the time. You didn't think Jell-O just became an overnight or organic success, did you? While people really did, it didn't take over the taste buds of the country on its own. All kinds of dishes were shoved in cookbooks to show all the things you could do with jelly, and the Christmas jelly slice was one of them. As the name suggests, it got attached to Christmas for the colors it had, red, green, and white, as well as for having a custard filling that really did well with other Christmas menus. Towards the tail end of the 20th century, holiday baking in general had taken off in an entirely new direction because people had a lot more to work with since the makeup of cooking and food in America was actively changing. An example is truffles, which are typically a pretty European dish that didn't ever have as much traction as they did in the 1980s-2000s period. People started making stuff like white. On the other hand, you also had angel food cake, which got its namesake from its creamy meringue of a similar color and an even sweeter aftertaste. Paired along with a foam base that made biting into it a seamless experience, it was not surprising that kids and adults alike loved this cake religiously. It was a pretty common cake in the early 1900s in the United States, though now it has faded into obscurity. The cake was so famous once that it would be mentioned in the New York Times recipe section a handful times. The recipe was what made the cake stand out. Unlike other cakes, angel food cake used no butter in the batter. This made it easier for people to bake a cake even with lesser ingredients. Orange Spritz cookies were a part of a new wave of orange craze that took over the nation. Though the fruit hadn't gotten much love outside of juice before, suddenly everyone and their grandmother were making batches of orange desserts like Spritz cookies. The reason these got pretty popular was through immigrant communities, which you can really credit a lot of food that's popular in America to. The orange zest was key here. It gave it that citrusy identity that the cookies were so known for. Recipes for these were all over Betty Crocker and Better Homes and Gardens cookbooks, and they were the joy of grandmas everywhere, especially since home-based cooking was taking off so well in the 1950s to 1970s era. It's exactly what you think. It looks like something quite close to ice cream, but made with rice. So, what's the secret behind this creamy concoction? It all starts with a cup of rice, simmered in milk, until it reaches a heavenly consistency. Add a sprinkle of spice and a dash of sweetness, and you've got rice pudding. In the 1970s, families loved it as a budget-friendly meal, perfect for stretching ingredients. Its versatility made it a star in both sweet and savory dishes. But many found it bland and mushy, with a texture that could be likened to baby food. Its consistency and lack of flavor left many unimpressed and unsatisfied. Some of us really don't care if it was Grandma's favorite thing to make. We are happy to leave it right where it belongs, right there alongside mayonnaise cake. You already know Grandmas have no chill around the Christmas season, and honestly, they're a lot more liable to just go all out with every ingredient they have rather than take it easy. It becomes a point of pride for some of them, I think, and I can kind of see why. It meant better and newer dishes for us to eat, though. I'm sure all of you can remember the cheesecake craze that dominated the start of the 2000s and how during Christmas you would have variations like the mini Santa cheesecake. A bite-sized snack, this made use of strawberries and other ingredients to represent Santa's colors, giving it a lovely visual as well as a fantastic taste. I guess it was more common for something like this to come out of New York than anywhere else, really. It was one of the hot spots for the entire focus on miniature desserts even back when these things first started. And it stayed as a cultural main point, where all things that affect the country definitely pass by New York. Taste of Home's Christmas Baking Cookbook highlighted this recipe as a fond Christmas favorite, one that really got all the kids together at the table. Speaking of what went on during the start of the 2000s, I'd feel pretty criminal if I didn't include it in one of the last ones on the list is the Grand Marnier cake, which dominated bakeries during the 50s to the 70s, especially in the South where it became something of a cult classic, especially in bars and among adults because it would usually be raced with rum or brandy or some other kind of alcohol the South would die for. In terms of flavor, it did not stop there. Chocolate chips and a delightfully sweet syrup made for an incredibly rich experience that was the perfect snack if you were tipsy or just wanted to catch up with a friend over a few delicious slices of cake. It faded away with other cakes that would usually be alcohol-laced, probably because American palates changed from sweet rum to McDonald's. This next one is Jell-O salad, a dessert that combines flavored gelatin with mix-ins like canned fruit, shredded carrots, marshmallows, and even cottage cheese, just throwing a bunch of ingredients at each other. Traditionally, the gelatin was dissolved in hot water, mixed with the ingredients, and left to set in the fridge. Jell-O salad's roots go back to the mid-20th century when convenience foods became popular, but it truly hit its stride in the 70s. It was on every potluck and holiday table. Remember those kitschy commercials that were said to be fun and festive dishes? Despite the cheerful marketing, many secretly hated this jiggly creation. Who else remembers poking at it with a fork, trying to understand the mysterious bits? While it's a nostalgic trip down memory lane, Jell-O salad is one retro dessert that most of us are happy to leave in the past, with no regrets. Moving on to the blackberry jam cake, this one might be one of the oldest cakes on the list. You can find recipes going as far back as the late 1800s. It was a bit of a wild mix of flavors with dry fruits, spices, vanilla, and double layers. Though it worked beautifully, thanks to the jam-packed filling. It makes sense why a cake with so much going on didn't survive the 21st century, as people preferred more streamlined dishes with a firm direction in taste over a whirlwind of flavor. The cake ultimately died out. But for when it was popular, it was beloved in homes, cafes, restaurants, bakeries, and tables everywhere. We all love cheese balls. You love them. I have an unhealthy obsession with them. They've always been there for us when there was only sleep for dinner. So they're a pretty personal topic. When people think about cheese balls, they think of a munch-oriented, cheese-filled heaven. So when you combine dried cranberries with sharp cheddar into the classic cheese balls, you get a controversial dish. I don't know how people loved it at parties in the Northeast, but they couldn't get enough of this there. Obviously, not everyone had the same enthusiasm for this. It took two completely opposite ends of the flavor spectrum and mixed them into cheese balls of all things. What do you think? Would you give it an honest shot? A lot of the dishes so far reflect food trends of the post-World War II era, where America was kind of revamping its identity as far as food was concerned. Next on our retro dessert journey is the surprising tomato soup cake. I know what you're thinking, tomato soup and cake. That's exactly why it made the list. The ingredients read like a standard spice cake: flour, sugar, eggs, butter, raisins, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. But the addition of tomato soup lends moisture and a subtle tang. If you want to recreate this, you mix the wet and dry ingredients separately, combine them, and bake until a toothpick comes out clean. Tomato cake soup originated during the Great Depression and saw a revival in the 70s due to its quirky charm. It was one of those weird recipes in family cookbooks. Did your family ever bake this cake? While it's a testament to home cooks' creativity and resilience, tomato soup cake is a quirky piece of food history that some might still find delicious today, but many are happy to leave in the past. Next up is the rather mysterious prune whip, a dessert made from pureed prunes, egg whites, sugar, and lemon juice whipped into a fluffy, mousse-like consistency. Despite being marketed for its elegant and healthful qualities, prunes were never a popular choice with kids, who often looked at this dessert with suspicion. Like, what on earth are these? Did your family try to pass this off as a posh treat, only to meet with turned-up noses? Well, mine did. While some appreciated its subtle sweetness and airy texture, others couldn't get past the prune base. It often reminded diners of medicinal prune juice rather than a treat. Today, prune whip is more of a culinary curiosity, remembered by some and forgotten by others. It's a light, fruity reminder of an adventurous era, but one that many are happy to leave behind, just like this green-colored oddity called lime jello cottage cheese salad. Everywhere during fall was plum pie. People would make it to get through the summer and enjoy the start of fall, and it was why a lot of fruit orchards were in business. They still are, you just see a lot less of them, because everything can be bought in a store in a can now. Back then, it was still common to go to fruit orchards and get your produce right there. Plum in general was something that never stuck for kids, but mostly for the older middle-aged audience with a more refined taste. Fig pie is kind of the same, except it's not really a pie that you would have found in America before the country decided to venture on a culinary quest to find out new flavors from abroad. Fig pie really took off when Spanish immigrants brought it over in the 18th century, but after that, it faded into irrelevance until the 1960s and 70s. Maybe it took that long for the taste of fig to come back into rotation for Americans? Either way, there were a few states that really didn't play about their fig pie, like Louisiana or Mississippi. There, you'd always get an amazing fig pie no matter the time of the year. This was especially true if you were a part of your local church communities. Back then, churches still used to host potlucks really regularly, and one of the most common dishes at these potlucks would be a sweet fig pie. You would even have dried fig pie because dried figs had a much thicker filling. Some people in Georgia would enjoy white fig pies instead of the normal ones, but when a dish has 5 different versions and church support, you know it's been popping off with everyone. Some of the 2000s versions of fig pies use goat cheese and balsamic reduction, but if you want a purely 1920s variant with all its authenticity, then the simpler you go with the ingredients, the better. Emma Rylander Lane was responsible for both creating and naming this one. As it goes, she went into a county fair bakery contest, Lane Cake, not named yet, in hand, and the judges immediately awarded her first place. She made it extremely popular in the early 1900s, and while the contest was just in Georgia, it's also known as prize cake, and it was a real hit with adults because of the bourbon lacing. You could switch it up with whiskey or brandy too. Taste-wise, people would get it mixed up with Baltimore cakes, but the Lane cake really had a flavor all unto itself. The cake didn't have a lot of variations across history, and while it used to be a prime choice for weddings, others have taken that place. Dr. Pepper Texas cake was a Kentucky favorite, especially among the younger 20-27 aged crowd. Dr. Pepper was already something the masses couldn't go without. It would have aromatics such as cinnamon and nutmeg. The chocolate frosting, though, sealed the deal for many, especially kids. Many rely on Dr. Pepper for their daily energy boost, and when you add sweet cakes to the mix, What the crowd of the 50s experienced was a truly unique combination, likely unmatched in the history of baking. Still, for all of its innovativeness, it could not stand the test of time. It did do one thing. It broadened the mind of bakers at the time who would usually stick to conventional baking methods and recipes. It opened their heads to the idea that you can mess around with flour and butter just like you can with meat and bread. Some might have even been surprised at what they ended up creating. For what it was, though, it was pretty popular and experimental. Some people used to call this a yin-yang pie because the base was pretty dark, but the topping was really light, hence why it got the name black bottom pie. It took bakers and Nestle chocolate to make, so home cooks found it really easy to get the core ingredients for this recipe going. Plus, it was like most cream pies of its time, in the sense that it had a custard or a thick pudding base that was then used as the filling for a pre-baked pie shell. This dish was one of the first signs of a big focus on aesthetic and presentation, which wasn't really a thing in the early 20th century. People wanted their food to look good, but they didn't really care about making a show of it or having any coordinated design themes. This dish went in the opposite direction, though, which made it really appealing for a lot of people to both look at and eat. Sliced sweet potato pie was often served with molasses, which got extremely common in the States as a whole during the World Wars and how they introduced rationing as a national concept. People got by on sweet potatoes and molasses rather exclusively, actually. It became one of those Southern recipes that just always gets handed down from one cook to another, and it was the talk of the town for ages. People loved to come into states in the South for a good sweet potato pie, especially during Thanksgiving. The sweet potato pie itself is actually something we can thank African American cooking for, because they were the ones who saw the natural sweetness of it and thought it would make for one delicious pie. It was also something you'd find in spades if you went through potatoes that were very native there. A neighborhood with a large African American presence. The sliced version came as a result of a focus on presentation, which again was in its baby stages as a concept. This was really popular in Central and South America because sweet potatoes were very native there. As far as the presentation went, they'd often cut the pie up into wedges and serve it that way instead of slices, which kind of made you feel like you were eating sweet potato. Mississippi mud pie has a funny story to its name. If you haven't grown up around the banks of the Mississippi River, then you wouldn't know it or be able to catch it either. The banks of that river are known for their extremely dark muddy color, more so than any other river, and the reason we call it this is because the mud pie resembles exactly the same shade. It's probably in the 20th century during the post-World War II era where this dish really took off. The first versions I could find talk a lot about just being a simple chocolate filling and a crust, like a pretty dense and thick fudge cake, but later ones even use marshmallows and ice cream. They also have a newfound focus on different chocolate layers, which give the pie entirely new levels of depth as a dish. You can use pretty much any kind of chocolate you'd like, as the whole point of this dish is to dump as much of that as possible into one pie. Gooseberry pie just isn't something you would see anymore these days. It's not that the taste faded out or there isn't an audience for that kind of flavor anymore. There definitely is. It was widely enjoyed throughout America, especially in rural places with strong ties to agriculture. The tart was made of these perfect gooseberries and just had one thickener, all being baked into a fluffy crust. It was a very early 19th century recipe, and you honestly just had to be there for when this was in its heyday. If you went to some corners in New England that are really into retro cooking, you would still find a lot of love for this dish, also because we just don't have enough gooseberry representation in American cooking in general. It's a shame it went out on its last legs in the early 20th centuries, because summers back then weren't even a quarter as bad as they are today. Seriously, why did they get all the summer recipes when we're the ones facing heat strokes every June and July? We're going to stay in this 1950 to 2000s period for a while, so buckle up. It's not a surprise either, since some of the most prolific dishes of the 20th century came out of this specific half of it. One of the most iconic recipes from that time was Forgotten Kisses, which were a meringue-based cookie. They got the name because the cookies would usually be left in the oven even after the time was done. If it doesn't make sense to you at first, They'd put them in for hours or overnight usually, so people would forget all about them until they were perfectly ready to eat. I guess there have been weirder names in history for food. Anyway, you're probably wondering what the point of leaving them for that long even is. After all, who doesn't like fresh cookies? People did this because it apparently made them firmer and gave them their unforgettable light and airy texture. Plus, meringue cookies stay okay even if you leave them for a really long while. These cookies were also kind of a sign of the times, because around when they were making waves in bakeries and holiday cookie exchanges, slow cookers also became a thing. It was a part of a new trend in American cooking where the masses were favoring recipes they could prep, leave, and forget about until they were ready, while still being inexpensive and easy enough to get. Hey, every family needs to eat, and sometimes doing it on a budget is ideal. So if that was you back in the 1960s or 70s, then you would often get your sugar rush satisfied with forgotten kisses. It was pretty inexpensive to make, and home baking was already the trend back then anyway. Peach cobbler is another all-time classic that got just as much love in the South and more than that in other states. No one out there can say they do not remember having a good peach cobbler. While it went out of fashion as far as being a family dinner table regular, it is not something that went extinct. On the flip side, no one can deny that it is not the hit it used to be either. Still, let's talk about what was rather than what is. See, the funny thing about cobbler was that it could be different depending on where you were. In the South, it was more like a fruit-filled deep dish pie. In the East Coast, it was similar to a fruit filling inside a baking dish with jam and biscuit elements. Either way, you were in for one hell of a party. We just wish the festivity continued until today. The Mississippi mud pie actually has some regional connotations to it. A rich, chocolatey pie that got its name for its gooey texture and specifically dark color. It would remind locals of the mud banks of the Mississippi River. It was incredibly popular in the WW2 era. Would you fancy gooey butter cakes in the 1970s? Missouri had you covered. A dense, sticky cake that got its name for its incredibly gooey inner. When you slice into this, the filling just oozes out like a thick river of sweetness. It contrasts very well with the butter topping, though it was made by accident when the original baker simply got the proportions wrong. This one is just as experimentative as adding alcohol to your cakes, but instead it is a mix of like 3 wildly different things, called a strawberry pretzel jello salad, ripe, juicy strawberries, a tantalizing summer treat along with crushed sweet pretzels with a jello layer. Sometimes more than one, the jello element actually worked along really well with the strawberry and pretzel combo. This is something our viewers may already be familiar with, as it remains a popular Sunday snack today. Plus, we know we always mention the crunch when it comes to stuff like pretzels, but it really was amazing. However, the idea of adding jello strips onto your perfectly good cream cheese strawberry pretzel salad is largely something pre-modern America. A lot of people would get the ick hearing about one of these. Maybe you did too. Scotcheroos are one of the best things about Minnesota. Rice Krispies treats made with butterscotch, chocolate, and peanut butter. These are delicious butterscotch bites, which can also be chocolate or peanut butter flavored, and are meant to be taken as a side, but you could chow down a plate easily. Coconut cream pie is one that is simple and straight to the point. You have your typical baked pie crust, which is always a slice of food nirvana, and a creamy coconut filling. Top it off with your usual crackers, nuts, whipped cream, and all the other lovely choices of the 90s, and you had yourself a very easy Sunday banger. Coconut cream pies were not just popular with the home chef crowd. They dominated in the baking market. Places across big states like New York and California. Often a really common sight at any bakery you would stroll by, really. Not on a stroll you would take today, though some families that kept a recipe in the bloodline may still indulge in it even past the 2000s. New Jersey taffy is known across the states as the taffy. However, chewy, flavored taffy originally came from Atlantic City around New Jersey, and it would typically consist of ingredients such as sugar, cornstarch, corn syrup, water, butter, glycerin, artificial flavoring, and more. It is incredibly popular in most regions in the USA, and you will find no shortage of it in any store you walk into. Bizcochitos and New Mexico are a match made in heaven. When you think of the flavor, try to picture a shortbread but with an anise flavoring that has been dusted and sprinkled generously with cinnamon and sugar. It might not be good for your calories, but it's a Christmas treat and the holidays are definitely always for binging. Simple does not just mean pie, it can also mean casserole, but this pineapple cheese casseroles were no simple take on the classic. Considered by many in the recent decades to be way too much and for good reason, it was widely a niche thing. We say it widely because there was the odd pineapple cheese casserole lover now and then found in every state across America. We are not the only ones who think it is odd there were pineapple cheese casserole fanatics, because if you ask America a while ago what they thought of this dessert, they only dished out anti-pineapple sentiments. People were sick of pineapple being added to foods that were great enough on their own. Sandwiches, pizzas, and now casseroles might be food blasphemy. Put two and two together, and you can see why this did not last till today.
Bananas Foster, a flamboyant dessert known for its dramatic tableside preparation, has seen a decline due to the decrease in formal dining experiences and the rise of DIY dining trends. The spectacle of flambeing, while impressive, requires a level of skill and safety precautions that may deter home cooks. Additionally, the dessert's reliance on rich ingredients like butter, sugar, and rum contrasts with the growing preference for lighter, fruit-based desserts. The shift towards quick and easy recipes for home entertainment has also contributed to its reduced popularity. Nonetheless, Bananas Foster remains a beloved classic for special occasions, suggesting that with innovative adaptations, it could regain popularity among those seeking to recreate restaurant-quality experiences at home.
Similar to the Jell-O experiment we just had are fruit cocktail gelatin models. Come on, everybody loves a good fruit cocktail, especially when it is as hot as recent days have been. But just like Jell-O, fruit cocktail gelatin molds would not last long enough to be remembered. What time they did spend in America's food diary was definitely a unique one. Not a flavor you could easily describe today because, well, you could not easily find it. From some pretty early references to around the 70s, we can tell that it felt like a very cold, fruity drink that had a bubblegum flavor to it. Of course, not all gelatin molds back in the day tasted the same. America started preferring its whiskey neat and its coffee black and left imaginative thoughts like the fruit cocktail gelatin molds behind. A shame too, because in our opinion, they pushed the boundaries of what a good drink can be. Back to the Jell-O takeover of the 60s, we have cherry chiffon gelatin, which just sounds like something that tastes and smells like flowers. You'd be kinda right. I mean, it's definitely got a very sweet taste overall to it, and the appearance did make it look like an edible flower. It had a very light and airy texture despite how it used whipped egg whites and cream, and it became a holiday favorite at potlucks. You'd serve this with salads and other gelatin-based desserts, and believe me, it worked every time. People love it when a pretty-looking dish tastes good too, so even if there were better gelatin dishes out there taste-wise, this was the perfect thing for a party. Cherry chiffon gelatin wasn't really the kind of dish you would make for yourself at home, though. It just had a presence to it, the kind that made you recognize it as a dish for a finer table and occasion. People would save dishes like these for important days on the calendar. After all, there weren't many casual chiffon things to eat, as it was considered one of the foods of the wealthy. It wasn't until much later when commercial brands for the stuff like Knox Gelatin and Jell-O were founded in 1890 and 1897, making it something that people could enjoy even at their homes. While it's true that eventually gelatin-based desserts became the norm at potlucks and church dinners, it was still also true that chiffon desserts were still reserved for when you really wanted to make dinner count. The first chiffon pie was brought in by Harry Baker in the 1920s, and ever since then, chiffon-style dishes have always been considered a finer dish. One of the salads you would see with a cherry chiffon gelatin,
Harvey Wallbanger cake, inspired by the cocktail, infused the dessert scene with a unique blend of orange, vodka, and Galliano, offering a spirited, tangy treat. Its decline can be attributed to changing tastes and the proliferation of desserts that incorporate a wider range of flavors and ingredients. The novelty of alcohol-infused cakes has expanded, making the Harvey Wallbanger cake less distinctive among desserts that feature more complex or exotic alcohol bases. Additionally, the shift towards more natural and health-conscious dessert options has led to a decreased interest in cakes heavily reliant on processed ingredients. Despite this, the cake's distinctive flavors and potential for reinterpretation with higher quality, less processed ingredients could revitalize its appeal in the context of modern culinary trends.
If we go over to states like South Carolina, especially in places like Charleston, then you can find some traces of Benna wafers. They were sesame seed cookies that came from the Gullah Geechee people of the Low Country, and the Benna seeds were a West African variant that were brought in because of the slave trades. The Gullah Geechee were descendants of those same slaves who had worked in plantations across South Carolina and Georgia, and a lot of their popular recipes that made use of Benny seeds would become mainstays of the cuisine in those areas. They had specific knowledge on how to grow these seeds, as well as how to properly make use of them in cooking, and they were always used in sweets and desserts even then too. In their culture, it's meant to be good luck, so dishes that made use of them were for holidays more than anything else. They were given as gifts or brought on over at parties as a snack, and they had a lovely nutty flavor that gave them a lot of support at crowded parties. Later on, throughout the years, it became more common for others to use dishes like Benny wafers as Christmas desserts, especially if you were having a table that was entirely home-cooked. Not that people had that many options for buying stuff for Christmas stores back then, not like we do now. Speaking of, what do you guys usually get for Christmas food? Or do you not order or buy anything at all?
Baked Alaska, once the pinnacle of dining elegance with its combination of cake, ice cream, and meringue, has faded in popularity due to its perceived complexity and the rise of simpler, more accessible desserts. The challenge of perfectly executing the meringue and achieving the flambé effect can be daunting for home bakers, contributing to its decline. Additionally, in a culinary landscape that values quick and straightforward recipes, Baked Alaska's time-consuming preparation makes it less appealing for everyday dessert choices. However, its dramatic presentation and the contrast of hot and cold elements retain a potential allure, suggesting that deconstructed or simplified versions could bring it back into favor for special occasions.
Remember how we just talked about the way desserts and salads were getting cozy with each other? The lines were only getting blurrier as the years kept on coming and didn't stop, and orange gelatin pretzel salads proved that point while also being another example of the orange movement that was sweeping up home cooking. This dessert salad had its heyday in the 1980s, particularly in the Midwest, and the key to it was the pretzel crust and orange gelatin. These salads were really easy to prepare, which kept in line with the trends that the nation was heading to. The Joys of Jell-O was a community cookbook that featured the dish in the 1970s because it was really popular in most posh neighborhoods.
Black Forest cake, celebrated for its layers of chocolate cake, cherries, and whipped cream, has experienced a decline as preferences have moved towards simpler, more minimalist desserts. The cake's elaborate assembly and rich flavor profile may not appeal to a health-conscious audience that prefers desserts with less sugar and lighter ingredients. Furthermore, the global palate has become more adventurous, seeking out new flavors and dessert concepts beyond the traditional. Despite this, the cake's deep-rooted cultural significance and potential for ingredient innovation, such as using less sugar or incorporating alternative flours, offer opportunities for a modern resurgence, particularly among those who appreciate the art of baking.
Kuchen might make you think of a fancy dish. It's really just the German word for cake, though, and traditionally it would be served as a double-layered pastry with a meringue topping, but you can spin this any way you'd like. In South Dakota, an assortment of dry fruits is preferred. Banana pudding is one thing, but Tennessee takes it up a notch with how creamy and rich theirs can be. If this is what you're aching for, then pick the next train or flight. You know where to go. Theirs is especially well known for the variety in wafers. Blueberry pie doesn't hit the same unless it's from Maine. A pie made with wild Maine blueberries, which actually was created in Scandinavia. though the very first blueberry pie recipe was found in cookbooks dating back to the 1970s. When you think of this, imagine contrasting flavors all centered around maximizing the sensation and taste of sweet blueberry jam. Speaking of airy, Cherry Angel food cakes had a texture that could be best described to be as light as the clouds, with a flavor that sent people further above to food heaven. Mouth-wateringly soft cakes with a soft yet rough crumb made this fruit dessert a go-to choice for many people. Angel food cakes had textures that did not make sense on paper, but did on the table. Top that with a cherry sauce made from scratch, or store-bought in case you just wanted it quicker, was perfection on a plate. People could not get enough of this dish wherever they went. Not a state you could point to that did not have at least some kind of fling with this culinary heartthrob. Most popular as something had at weddings or celebrations, this was not only a sweet dessert, but an even sweeter gesture. Maybe next time you have to go somewhere, you might consider an angel cake. Well, good luck finding a legit one, because we definitely could not in this day and age. Basque cakes are another one from the French. A simple, dense cake that is commonplace in the North Basque regions of France, but also Nevada. A traditional Basque cake looks like a black cherry jam pastry with a double pastry layer. The maple walnut fudge in New Hampshire is otherworldly. It's a fudge made with local maple syrup and walnuts. You'll experience crunchy walnuts in every bite you take, but the creamy fudge and maple syrup will keep you coming back. Some recipes also add white chocolate chips or sweetened milk to go all out for the sweet tooths. So far, we have had some pretty tangy and sweet fruits, but let's go back to our roots with some country apple dumplings. Especially beloved in the South, they were a hit in most homes across America because of how easy and quick the idea was. A big fat reward to go with it made it a solid dinner plan on Sundays. Dumplings with apple fillings wrapped in pristinely soft dough with cinnamon. Honestly, when it sounds this good and people still say that imagining it doesn't compare to experiencing it, you know it was something special. At least a thing deeply special and a comfort food for a lot of people. America definitely had its fair share of baking phases on a national scale. During times like the 60s, these were just the perfect thing to make. Sad that you could not find one in bakeries nowadays like before. The Darby pie emerged in Kentucky in the 70s. A chocolate and walnut tart created by Leodra and Walter Kern in Prospect, Kentucky at the Melrose Inn. This has become somewhat of a legacy for the state because to this day, Kern's Kitchen guards the secret recipe better than KFC ever did theirs. The delicious taste and secrecy around the recipe allows for this 70s classic to remain relevant today. Maybe lemon chiffon pies are not so popular in bakeries anymore, but once they used to be in the section of food magazines and people still remember how good they were. Do you ever fondly remember watching MasterChef contestants whip up lemon chiffon pies? Especially in the Australian version, which was broadcasted in the United States too. Lemons and more lemons. That is one idea that has a historically verified track record. In recent years, people have started to extract flavors from fruits without fully utilizing the fruits themselves. Delicious, airy lemon sponge cakes topped off with lemon-flavored meringue sounded like America was on to something, and we think it should never have been let go. For the life of us, some of the downfalls of these once household names make no sense. Guess we are not the only ones left wondering why this went away from family tables. Apple cider donuts took Connecticut by storm. At first, just spiced donuts made with fresh apple cider. It turned into something incredible when Harlem baker Adolph Levitt and a bright-eyed engineer met by chance. They got to making a system that could cut the work of making donuts in less than a half time, making apple cider donuts a marvel in the 1970s. Now, if you were a serious home baker back in the day, like some people were, you might remember Spumoni baked Alaskas. We use the word serious because making this thing and doing it right was no joke. See, while it was not as flashy as setting rum alight like with the Fosters, it did have a lot of simple but dearly necessary things that could easily go wrong. Spumoni, to begin with, is a sherbet popular in Italian-American cuisine. Making a good sherbet was challenging back then. Topping that off with baked Alaska, an ice cream cake you had to make from scratch, could get even more challenging. Luckily, it was so popular people eventually got it right. Times like that are far gone now, though. And if you manage to find anyone who can make a proper one, contact us. Coffee Cabinet from Rhode Island isn't your average milkshake or cup of coffee. It takes the best of both worlds and makes it a caffeine hit that tastes so good, you'll likely end up going way over the doctor's recommended limit. Huguenot Torte did not actually start out in South Carolina. It used to be called Ozark Pudding and was first shown in a 1950 cookbook. This dish is all pecans to the center. That's probably why it got so popular in the South, with their preference for dry fruits and desserts. Coconut became a popular ingredient in the U.S. during the late 1800s, and coconut cream pie instantly became a cult classic. This one was really different than Grandma's usual desserts as it brought a taste of topics to the table. The heart of this pastry was the coconut cream filling made with coconut milk or cream, sugar, eggs, and sometimes a bit of cornstarch to thicken. And no coconut pie was complete without a thick layer of whipped cream on top. Thankfully, my grandma was extra generous with the topping. Some grandmas liked putting their own spin on the dessert by adding a hint of vanilla or almond extract to the filling, or even pineapple for a piña colada-inspired twist. Sadly, today's store-bought versions don't even come close to what Gram used to make back in the day. Speaking of festivals and parties, tipsy cakes, as funny as the name is, were pretty popular at both. It does not take a genius to figure that one out, nor does it take one to see just how good sherry, brandy, and cake can be if combined. People went absolutely nuts over a good cake, and sometimes got buzzed rid of them too, depending on how much brandy they used, of course. And just between you and me, most people went over what the recipes suggested. Some states would use angel food cakes as the base and put 1 or 2 ounces of whiskey in there, fruit custard fillings, or if you wanted to complement the sherry, a vanilla cream filling were the go-to choices for most. Sadly, nowadays the concept is more or less lost, and even we had to dig deep for this one. The Mississippi mud cake is actually one that gets its name because of the region. It's a little poetic, really. The gooey, dark chocolate hues of the cake would often remind locals, especially those living closer to the river, of the dark, muddy banks of the Mississippi River. This thing was a hit by every definition of the word across the 50s and 70s. To nail the flavor, though, you really needed to get the icing just right, but for locals, nailing the rustic look of it was just as important. Clothes make the man. Maybe frosting makes the cake. Kids would enjoy it with a side of toasty marshmallows. Adults would remember childhood days spent playing near the river over slices shared with tea. It was something that pulled the community together. This was most popular as a birthday cake for children, especially because they would already be playing around those same muddy banks, so it really created a vibe on its own unique to Mississippi. The cake had a very strong nostalgia factor going for it. Pecan pralines are a Texas favorite because they're enjoyable in every weather. The harsh, dry, sunny weather of Texas or the savage winters that follow it, you can always count on a trusty praline to set you right. Jell-O salad rings a few bells for everyone, but in Utah, they even add vegetables into the jelly mix. In the 70s, this Jell-O salad became so famous in Utah that they created separate salad bars and restaurants that allowed people to make their own Jell-O salads. Not sure if the Sock It To Me cake stands out because of its unique choice in naming or because of it being the love child of a streusel coffee cake and a cheesecake, but it made its place in history nonetheless for the time it was there. The Duncan Hines Company came up with this around the 1970s. You could always find a simple recipe to make at home on the back of their golden cake mix boxes. One such cake was the Sock It To Me cake. But how'd it get the name? America got this phrase from England. Back then, it just meant giving someone a good cross or jab over their jaw. Lincoln Perry, in his 1945 performance of the musical Big Timers, used the phrase. And so the cake got its funky name from pop culture. Huckleberry ice cream from Montana is a special thing. It's known for its refreshing sweet and sour notes as well as its contrasting tangy flavors, all of which center around the iconic huckleberry taste that Montana's forests are known for. Kolaches are a French invention, but Nebraska took to them pretty well. Check pastry filled with fruit or cheese. It's a sweet pastry that is characterized by the yeast dough it incorporates and the fruit that it's layered with. This was originally a cake. It's also not just Nebraska that favors this. The dish took off very well in Texas too. Baba au rum is another cake that came from outside the USA. Originating from babka, a traditional yeast cake from Poland and Ukraine, Baba au rum found its way to France where it quickly became popular. The story behind is that the reigning king of the times, Stanislaus I of Poland, brought the recipe with him along to France, where the French went crazy for it. It appealed to their sweet tooths and ticked all the right boxes. It would have contrasting flavors, like savory notes from dry fruits like apricots, but also citrus from the aftertaste of oranges and lemons. You could always lace it with rum too, another trend of the times. For people that were into that sort of flavor experience, it was like arriving in cake heaven. Sadly, this is a cake you'll rarely find being served anywhere now as yeast cakes went down in popularity closer to the 2000s. Pecan pie goes back further than just Oklahoma, though the state definitely has no shortage of specialty bakeries and cafes that will serve you a killer pecan pie. It is a Thanksgiving favorite for American households. The irresistible scent of eggs, butter, fresh pecans, a thick, fragrant syrup, it's enough to make a man go mad. You might see a lot of pre-20th century variations of this, but the pie as we know it was widely accepted to be a 20th century creation exclusively. The esteemed German chocolate cake found its way to American soil through Samuel German around 1950. This incredible baker went away from the norm of the time, which always favored the more natural taste and aroma of dark baking chocolate. It tends to be bittersweet, and people back then loved that. However, Samuel German would make a baking chocolate that was on the opposite end of the spectrum: sweet, warm, rich in flavor, and gently explosive when it would hit your tongue, like being soothed into a massage. Though, despite the incredible success he found with his formula back then, tradition would still overcome it, because most modern recipes prefer the standard dark baking chocolate now. Cherry pies from Michigan are in a league of their own. The culture of fruit pies began in the early 1500s. When they made their way to America, Michigan opted to perfect the cherry pie. Its popularity peaked in the 1970s when Michigan started having regular pie-making competitions. The cherry pie was a fan favorite and hence became a staple. Quaker oats are just as popular now as they were back in the 1930s, but you may not have heard of Quaker oats being transformed into a dessert known as the Lazy Daisy oatmeal cake. That is exactly how the people back then got their daily protein intake, though. It got wildly popular because it was so incredibly simple. Some sugar, a 10-inch pan, Quaker oats, and basic baking knowledge had you all set for a healthy and delicious meal. During that time, it was a favorite of low-income households and for those who wanted to work out on a budget. This cake would cost you almost nothing and had only benefits calorically, which is not a deal you normally get with baked goods, so you can imagine why it spread. Maybe it shouldn't have gone away with the years. Peach cobbler from Georgia's a summer delight, a warm, sweet dessert made with fresh peaches and a biscuit-like topping. When English settlers first reached American colonies, the military men might have gone on making plans and whatnot, but the cooks did what they do best: innovate and improvise. Thus, peach cobbler was born. Haupia is the tropical dish to go for if you really want to get into the summer as well, especially in Hawaii. A traditional coconut milk-based Hawaiian dessert. It is incredibly popular in Polynesia for its distinct flavors and sweet notes. No one knows where exactly the original lemon cheese layer cake recipe originated from, but it was all the rage in the 50s down in the South. If you ever wanted to escape the southern heat and just feel refreshed or get a boost of energy through your day, or simply just enjoy a nice, relaxing brunch at a good cafe, this was the dessert to order. All you needed to make it at home was some eggs, lemons, and butter, so it was popular with the home chefs of the era too. Today, preferences have leaned more towards double-layered pastry cakes with crispier crusts and different fillings, so the cheese aspect probably held it down from surviving in the long haul. Smith Island cake is Maryland's specialty, a multi-layered cake with chocolate frosting. This one has some historical context. Women would send these cakes with their husbands during the annual oyster harvests during autumn, and they were signs of union and bonding, serving as a reminder to the men of what they had to come to. It was a rather cute tradition in the 70s for couples to send each other this cake. Ambrosia salad. This colorful mix featured canned fruit cocktails, mini marshmallows, shredded coconut, and sour cream or whipped topping, sometimes with maraschino cherries and pecans. That's a lot of ingredients for a dessert. Simply mix and chill the ingredients until flavors meld. Ambrosia salad, rooted in Southern cuisine, became a staple at family gatherings and potlucks. Remember those bright, jiggly bowls that seemed to glow with an unnatural color? This was it. But even though we loved it then, the sweet and tangy combination doesn't do it for us anymore. It's fun to reminisce, but most of us are happy to have left ambrosia salad in the past. Ever seen marshmallows in a salad? If you lived in the 70s, your answer would be yes. This fluffy mix featured mini marshmallows, canned fruit cocktails, whipped cream, and sometimes shredded coconut or chopped nuts. The preparation was simple. All the ingredients were mixed and chilled in the fridge. It often appeared at family gatherings, church potlucks, and holiday dinners, and was touted for its ease and kid-friendly appeal. Many found the combination of marshmallows and fruit a bit too much, which is why nobody makes them anymore. It often resulted in a gelatinous mess that lacked any real texture contrast. The sweetness overpowered any other flavors, making it hard to eat more than a few spoonfuls. So its high sugar content and taste have given way to today's less sugary options, making this dessert one many are happy to leave behind. German chocolate cake in Kansas go a ways back, a rich chocolate cake with coconut pecan frosting. The name comes from its inventor, Samuel German, and he actually made this a unique take on a chocolate cake with his dark baking chocolate formula. Modern recipes usually tend to go for a bitter, savory dark chocolate, but this recipe is traditionally made with sweet chocolate. How do you prefer yours? Savory or beyond sweet? This dessert combined lime-flavored Jell-O, cottage cheese, crushed pineapple, and sometimes nuts or marshmallows. The result was a wobbly, creamy, sweet-sour concoction. The mix of lime Jell-O and cottage cheese created a texture often similar to curdled milk. So it's surprising how this ever became a party staple. Popular at potlucks and holiday gatherings, this salad was often showcased in fancy molds. Who remembers those vintage ads promising a refreshing and nutritious treat? Despite its vivid color and festive presentation, many found the combination of lime Jell-O and cottage cheese too strange. Strange enough, we had to put the nail in the coffin so it would never come back. Nice, another dessert named after an anima. Spam monkey bread defies dessert norms. This dish combined the savory taste of Spam with the sweetness of traditional monkey bread, resulting in a curious mix of flavors. Preparation involved cubing Spam and layering it with biscuit dough, brown sugar, butter, and sometimes cinnamon. Baked until golden and caramelized, this sticky, pull-apart bread was a potluck staple. Did your family try this as a quirky experiment, only to leave guests scratching their heads? Well, Spam monkey bread often left diners avoiding a second helping. The lingering smell of Spam mixed with cinnamon and sugar during baking was enough to put off many guests. And the flavor? An odd combo that made it hard to enjoy as a dessert or a savory dish. We had to delete it, like the Spam in our emails. Possum pie is an Arkansas favorite, a layered dessert with chocolate pudding, cream cheese, and whipped cream. As good as it sounds, the story of how it made its claim to fame is just as much of a delight. In a 1974 newspaper, this pie swept the competition, and it wouldn't stop making headlines after either. In the Arkansas Gazette, a dish called possum pie randomly popped up and got a review in around the 1980s. Imagine stumbling upon a pie so good, the rest of your city can't shut up about it either. The potato chip cookies were made for people who can't decide if they want it sweet or salty. These cookies, made from butter, sugar, flour, and crushed potato chips, were staples at bake sales and potlucks. The preparation was simple. Mix the ingredients, form the dough into balls, flatten slightly, and bake until golden. The result was a cookie with a tender, buttery texture and a salty crunch. Despite their simplicity, these cookies were polarizing. with people either loving or loathing the salty-sweet combination. Did your family have a secret recipe for these because mine did? While they might be a quirky reminder of experimentation, potato chip cookies are one 70s treat most are happy to forget. Same with this beer float pie. The root beer float pie did not have to ever be made. It combined root beer and vanilla ice cream into a chilled, creamy concoction. Made by blending root beer concentrate with vanilla pudding mix and whipped topping, then pouring it into a graham cracker crust and freezing it, the pie tasted just like a root beer float. It was popular for summer barbecues and birthday parties, and even the ads claimed it was refreshing and easy preparation. Despite its charm, the intense root beer flavor was too much for many. I mean, if I wanted to drink herbs, I'd just do so, right? The artificial root beer flavor often overwhelmed the senses. Plus, its frothy texture sometimes felt like eating foam, making it less enjoyable than a real float. Root beer float pie is a dessert many are happy to leave in the past. Peach ice cream is one of the few reasons to have an extended stay in Delaware. Homemade ice cream made with fresh peaches. Though ice cream freezers make this job a lot easier than it used to be, back in the days of lettuce brine, you had to do it all by hand. Manually mixing the ice cream did take 10 times longer, but it also led to some incredibly vivid and flavorful ice cream, the kind Delaware would eventually become known for across every state. Next is a hot dog and marshmallow casserole. Okay, combining hot dogs and marshmallows in a dessert was as bad as it sounds. This casserole was made with sliced hot dogs, mini marshmallows, canned pineapple chunks, and a sweet glaze made from brown sugar and mustard. The oddly sweet and savory concoction was layered and baked until everything melded together. The dessert likely emerged during the 70s era of experimental recipes. Most families that served these got side eyes. Despite the novelty, this dish was more a conversation piece than a delight. How many of you would dare serve this today? Thankfully, hot dog and marshmallow casserole is an experiment that now belongs to the past. Next up, we have the cornflake tart, a 70s dessert that brought the crunch of breakfast cereal to the table. This tart features a short crust pastry base filled with a sticky mixture of golden syrup, butter, and sugar, topped with crunchy cornflakes. The preparation involved baking the pastry shell, pouring in the warm syrup mixture, and sprinkling the cornflakes on top before popping it back in the oven. While it was a school dinner classic in the UK, loved for its sugary hit and satisfying crackle, its sheer sugar overload made it a toothachingly sweet treat. Not to mention that it often resulted in sticky, hard-to-clean baking pans. Did anyone else have this as a childhood favorite? Well, you're grown now and wise, and you know that all that sugar is not good for you. This crunchy, sticky dessert is best enjoyed in small doses, if at all. Beignets may be the most famous 70s treat in Louisiana, but it was not their own creation. These deep-fried donuts dusted with powdered sugar were a marvel when they were first introduced in the 70s. While Louisiana might be known for these, the concept itself came from 18th century France, which then found its first whiff of American soil when the French brought the recipe to New Orleans. And to the dessert, that often turned out wrong. Forgotten cookies were made from egg whites, sugar, vanilla, and chocolate chips. These meringue cookies were baked by whipping the egg whites and sugar, folding in the chips, and leaving them in a preheated oven that was turned off. This method promised a perfect cookie, but often resulted in inconsistent textures, from too dry to too chewy. Cookies are supposed to be nice, aren't they? But forgotten cookies had other plans. Its name is mostly because you could forget them in the oven and they'd turn out nice. But now, we want to end this toxic relationship. While they hold a special place in retro dessert lore, forgotten cookies are one treat many are happy to forget. Prickly pear sorbets, a refreshing sorbet made from prickly pear cactus fruit. These cactuses exclusively grow in South America and have long been a proud staple of Southern and, in particular, Mexican culture. They even have it on their flag, and for good reason. If you tried this, you'd be just as crazy about it. It's a fruit sorbet with just the right amounts of tropical goodness and sweetness. But nothing said, cringe as loudly as this next dessert. It's called grasshopper pie. This no-bake pie combined a chocolate cookie crust and a filling of whipped cream, marshmallow fluff, and crème de menthe, giving it that unmistakable minty flavor and color. Preparation was simple. Mix the marshmallow and crème de menthe, fold in the whipped cream, pour into the crust, and chill. Grasshopper pie peaked in popularity in the 70s thanks to its striking appearance and ease of preparation. Despite the hype, its overly sweet and minty flavor gave it many one-star reviews. So they had to go. And why was it even named after an insect? Yuck! Indiana's take on a sugar cream pie is a rich custard pie, also known as Hoosier pie. The backstory for this one is that settlers brought the recipe for this along with them, making it a mainstay custard pie for Indiana. It also doubled as the state's unofficial pie in the 1970s. As more pies came into the market, this one lost its appeal to the people. Since maple harvests are the topic, let's talk about the best thing to ever come out of them, which is maple syrup pie. It was something that people only associated with Canada, but now you'd find it in bulks and batches throughout bakeries in the US too, especially if you go to the northeastern areas. The reason this became so popular is because it took 5 ingredients max, the maple syrup, and then your typical assortment of stuff you need for a pie: cornstarch, flour, butter, and eggs. The maple syrup pie became extremely common in places like Vermont. Maple syrup in general is something that people always associate with the holiday seasons here. There's an extreme amount of maple syrup sales that you can credit solely to the large amounts people tend to buy during the Thanksgiving to Christmas stretch of the year. People tend to go all out on syrups and desserts during that time, since they like having something other than cranberry sauce to serve to the guests. It's also something that rises once fall hits because a lot of people feel like maple syrup matches the warm, slow, and cozy spirit of the season. If you go on over to states like Vermont, though, you'll find that the most common thing there was actually something called black bottom pie. This takes a graham cracker, a pastry crust, and a melted chocolate layer with a custard and whipped cream to give you one very heavy pie. It's known for its several layers of flair. First, you have your shaved chocolate and pecan toppings, then the custard, then the crust itself, before you get to the filling deep inside, which just oozes out once you get to the bottom of the pie. Roast pumpkin salad. You've already seen some salads on the list so far that push the boundaries of what a salad conventionally is. You and I are probably used to seeing Caesar salads and lots of greens on the plate whenever somebody mentions one, so for things like roasted pumpkin to make an entrance, it took a bit of getting used to. However, that doesn't at all mean it wasn't welcome, since people took to roast pumpkins insanely well. California, especially, had a whole pumpkin salad subculture going on, and the dish started becoming more and more popular outside of the holidays too. It was a perfect fall or winter dish since it used other warm ingredients like spinach, arugula, and goat cheese. Plus, a lot of Americans were vouching for healthier food anyway, so this fit everything the nation was asking for at the time. Fruit mince pies are probably the one dish that has the oldest roots on this entire list. If we want to get really technical about it, then it was made in the 17th century, but it only really picked steam around the 19th century when it decided to let go of meat entirely and instead focused on alcohol and fruit. This was kind of a trend that started only in the 20th century, since earlier versions of the mince pie always meant that you were having a hefty serving of meat to go with it too. However, thanks to the Depression and the World War era, people became a lot more used to eating seasonal fruit and making dishes out of that instead. Meat would rise in price and become pretty unaffordable, especially anything that wasn't chicken. Poultry or red meat was out of the question for most people. Since the dish had some pretty strong European and British ties, it was most popular in places like New England. It then became a part of booze food in American culture around the 20th century, where it was a staple of Christmas parties even outside of European communities that had heavy British-American populations. People couldn't get enough of all the different versions of a fruit mince pie you could get out there. Wanted something with raisins? You were covered. Candied apples or citrus peels? A bakery around the corner does an amazing one. Prefer brandy over rum? Most places had the option for both. When I say they caught on, I mean they spread, like pretty severely. Oatmeal caramel cream pies are something special. They weren't too common or as memorable as some of these other dishes. In fact, you probably haven't even heard of one until this video. But I'm going to show you why they got so beloved in the niche community they made for themselves. First, you have to ask, how did the idea of mixing oatmeal and caramel into a cream pie come into place? It began with the creation of the oatmeal cookie, which had already become widely available in America by the 19th century. Oat consumption in general was much higher in those times than it is today. While we might eat oatmeal for its value as a protein, people ate it back then because of the fiber and how it kept you full for really long. Anyway, the very first American oatmeal cookie recipes started in the 1800s. Then came Little Debbie, which was owned by McKee Foods, and in 1960 they introduced the oatmeal cream pie. It had soft oatmeal cookies stuffed into a sweet cream filling, and when that got old, they decided to take everything up a notch with the addition of caramel. Now it has two cream fillings. One was oatmeal and the other was caramel, and this was easy enough of a dish that you could get busy in the kitchen and even make it yourself. It may have been a little complicated getting the mixture of cream and caramel just right, but with enough practice, it was easy. This dish had the power to appease a group filled with people from all age groups, so it's definitely something grandmas kept around for a day where other dishes would leave at least someone unsatisfied at the table. The Shakers were a group that believed in Christ rather deeply, and they came from England to the United States where they made rotos in Ohio, Kentucky, and New England. They were pretty famous for their devotion to the bit, but they had a reputation that preceded that too. It was their practical cooking which really made heads turn, because it was all based on local ingredients that anyone could find on a budget, and the goal was to waste as little as possible. They had these communal kitchens and they used to share meals, so a lot of their recipes were things you could produce in a... Similarly, grapefruit pie is an even lesser-known delicacy in America than blackberry pie. It's just that dishes which made a lot of use of actual natural ingredients instead of processed stuff and layers of thick whipped cream faded out of the general food scene. You don't hear too much about them anymore, even though they're probably a lot simpler and easier to make. That's how they got their name in times where modern conveniences just weren't there, you know? It's things like that which make them timeless and something you can enjoy anytime. I guess this isn't an all-natural dish though, since it does make use of gelatin, which started getting popular in the 1950s and 60s onwards. Sour cream pie is a lesser-known but really beloved American dessert, which goes all the way back to European immigrant communities, especially the ones from Eastern Europe. The best part of this dish is that it takes something like sour cream and actually makes a proper dessert out of it. It was first only something that would come out of German kitchens, and it had very little American influence. Sour cream in America, on the other hand, was largely just used in casseroles and such, maybe the occasional cake or tart. When these immigrant populations first came and made their homes in the Midwest, flourishing Eastern European communities in America meant that the country was getting an expanded, more global food palette. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, anywhere you'd go in states like these, you would get sour cream pie. Some of it was plain, as in just a custard made with sour cream and sugar, but some of it was based around fruits like apples and raisins. Dishes like these are just the best, don't you agree? I really prefer raisins to apples, but you might be the opposite. The dish is built in a way that it could work for the both of us, and that's why most homes adopted the sour cream pie and stuck to it religiously in times of need. Sometimes a calm, non-volatile dish that can be spun a few different ways depending on basic stuff really helps. Eat. Are you a fan of the fall? The weather, the orange leaves, the scenery, and most importantly, the amazing food. One of the best examples of food you'd find a batch and easily make for an entire large group. One of those was the lemon shaker pie, which was one of the best imports of the US. If you were at a shaker residence, then you'd always find a pantry stocked full of lemons because they got a lot of use out of this pie. The crust is simple, minimal, and straight to the point. There are no fancy decorations or unnecessary flashy ingredients in this pie. It's a down-to-earth pie that uses the entire lemon, including the peel. They mix the sliced lemons with sugar and leave it to macerate for many hours, which gives a flavor that you otherwise just can't get. I have to hand it to them. They really did excel in making full use of every part of a pie. Speaking of frugal cooking, dial it back to the Great Depression for a second with me. I'm talking about the heart of the crisis right in the 1930s and maybe the start of the early 40s. Crackers are more in style than ever before, and it's the breakfast of many people as it's a pretty cheap way to keep that appetite in check and those finances safe. Still, humans are humans, and cravings are something that gets all of us really badly. Have you made your list of desserts yet? Share your favorite in the comments, give this video a like, and hit subscribe to stay connected.